Welcome to Garden Talk. Larry Mealer here, and today we start the show by talking about perennials, which I think are the backbone of many a garden here in our state. The American Horticultural Society has a new book out. It's called Essential Guide to Perennial Gardening, Techniques and Know-How for Planning, Planting, and Tending Low-Maintenance Perennial Plantings. And here to tell us about it, Matt Mattis. He is an American Horticultural Society member. He's an author and horticulturist, and really great to have him with us today. And want to hear from you. What questions to have about your perennials? Are you looking maybe for a low-maintenance perennial for your garden? What other questions do you have? Give us a call. The number is 800-642-1234, 1-800-642-1234, or send an email to talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. Matt Mattis, welcome. Tell us about the American Horticultural Society. What's your mission?
Sure. Thank you, Larry. I'm excited to be here. Well, I am the Senior Director of Horticulture at the American Horticultural Society, which I think, which is really, experiencing a resurgence now in popularity. There's so many plant societies across the country, but to have one that's national and one that's from, let's say, the early 20th century, from 1920 or so, it's just a great organization. It has a great publication. We have a bi-monthly magazine, which I think a lot of people don't know about. But it's if you're a plant geek or a plant nerd or a vegetable gardener or a perennial gardener, I think you'd find it eye-opening. So we hit every state in the country.
And you have a really cool farm. It's called River Farm as your headquarters. Tell us about River Farm. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, that was actually part of George Washington's original property on the Delaware. So a very historic site. It's open to the public. It's also a botanic garden and a great old farmhouse there. And people have their weddings there. It's, what you would do at a normal botanic garden, but also it houses the American Horticultural Society.
Yeah. I know the AHS, American Horticultural Society, offers a number of educational opportunities. Maybe you could talk about the kinds of educational opportunities you offer.
Oh, sure. Well, we have people who, no matter where you live in the country, right, you can participate in things like we have AHS Explore, which is a fantastic travel program traveling. This year we're going to Japan. We're going to Ireland next year, to the Netherlands. It's a lot of people take advantage of that. And there's different levels of tours, even in the country, like Santa Fe. So if you love gardens and you want, art and culture mixed in, those are great trips. We have something called the AHS Garden Network, which is really a fantastic deal where you get discounts at all of the partner botanic gardens around the country. So from in New England here, the New England Botanic Garden or the New York Botanic Garden or on the West Coast. You don't have to pay full admission. Sometimes it's free admission, and there are other benefits that come with that. So that's a big one that members enjoy. And then there's AHS Live, which is, no matter where you are, if you have a computer and you can take classes, online learning series, and all different levels from beginners to experts. And those are really focused, some have been like on pollinator gardens with Kelly Norris or planting vegetable gardens. I think people really enjoy that. So you can see it's truly a national organization. And I think the best benefit is the American Gardener magazine, which is an award-winning magazine. And you only get it if you're a member, so it's really worth it. It's really one of America's premier gardening magazines and worth checking out.
The book, AHS has published a number of gardening books, and the one we'll kind of focus on today is titled Essential Guide to Perennial Gardening, Techniques and Know-How for Planning, Planting, and Tending Low-Maintenance Perennial Plantings. What makes a good gardening reference book in your mind?
I think a good gardening book would provide information for a gardener as he or she grows, right? So some of us are beginners, some of us are experts. I think you can learn something from any book, but particularly with me, I like to have a book that I'm always learning something with. And this one does that. I mean, I wrote a book on flower gardening, right? But the information that's in this is it covers a little bit of everything. So whereas, let's say, my book doesn't cover design of a garden, for instance, or how do you work with the soil. So if you're brand new to perennial gardening, this book is helpful. If you're an expert, it covers sort of new trends in perennial gardening.
Yeah, there's a lot in this book, and I love the photos you do and the diagrams. You do such the book does such a nice job of explaining things, and then we get to see the flowers, the perennials, and we get to see how they're located in a landscape for really good ideas, for your own landscape.
Yeah, no matter where you live. I think a lot of the older perennial books tended to focus, let's say, on an English approach, like an English border. And perennials became very popular again in the 1980s. So a lot of Americans with backyards or front yards wanted to have that English border or that cottage garden. But in our modern life, things have changed. We don't have gardeners. We don't have time to spend, with a 15-foot deep border. This book covers all sorts of perennials. So if you have a shady yard, if you have a woodland garden, that's where perennials live. If you have a full sunny farm border, and you want pollinators in it, this book goes into that sort of detail. I don't know many new perennial books that cover these new trends, like I want a pollinator, or I want to plant a border with natives, or maybe I want some natives, some grasses, some pollinator plants, and some old-fashioned, cottage perennials all together. So we've changed how we garden, and this book addresses that.
It does indeed. Martha in Menominee, Wisconsin, has a question for you. Let's go there. Hi, Martha.
Hi, Larry. I'm so excited. Here's my plan. I want to grow lupine. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I saw it growing up in northern Wisconsin near a riverbed. I don't have a riverbed in my yard, but I do have a low wet spot. Can I grow lupine in my yard?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Martha. I love lupins. Lupins or lupine, there's no wrong way to say it because Botanical Latin was not a spoken language. But I think you're one of the best parts of the country to be able to grow lupins because of, the cooler summers than, let's say, we would have, in the south or in the sub-Atlantic area. So, yes, you should be able to grow them. I mean, how wet does it get?
Well, I just have some low spots in my yard that typically are soppy, and it takes a few days longer to dry up. They do get full sun, it does get full sun there. So I'm thinking it's worth a try. What do you think?
I think so. They enjoy moisture. They don't want to be soaking wet, but as long as it drains, it's still damp. The lupins do not want to dry out, so I would think that's probably a good condition to try them. And full sun definitely will help.
Yeah. Martha, good luck with that. Thank you so much for calling. Appreciate your call. You can join in too, by the way. Number to call 800-642-1234, or you could email us to talk@wpr.org. For new gardeners, explain what a perennial is.
Oh, sure. So a perennial is any plant that's an herbaceous plant. So an herbaceous plant is a plant that, say, emerges from the ground, that grows up in the spring and summer, and then in the autumn it dies back to the ground again, mostly right to the ground again. And you may see dead stalks or seed pods, and then reemerges again the following year. And most perennials can be, obviously the word perennial comes back every year, whereas, let's say, a biennial, which is a little more confusing of a term, would be a plant that maybe has to grow for a whole year or two and then bloom, and then it completes its life and sets seed again, like foxgloves, for instance, or hollyhocks. But a perennial would come back every year. There are things that are, not be too confusing, but there are things that are called short-lived perennials. And lupins, what we just talked about, would be one of those, where a lupin, especially a hybrid, like a Russell hybrid, may come back for 2 or 3 years, or a columbine, and then start to fade away and get a little weaker, and often they self-seed and will come up somewhere else. So they last more than 2 years. And snapdragons actually could be a mild, sort of short-lived perennial in warmer climates. But generally, it's a plant that comes back. But there are very long-lived perennials like peonies that could last 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And the new book, I really like this one feature of the book. It features 150 plant profiles and with some great photos. How did you decide on those 150?
I know, it's a bit of a beauty contest, right? Well, so what's interesting about these plant profiles, because yes, you do want to include something that everyone will like, but instead of including all the common perennials, we try to include perennials that are new in the trade or new to even conventional perennial growers. Something like Amsonia, which is a native subshrub or a native perennial that you'll see, planted in these meadow plantings that are so popular now. A lot of those plants are added in here. So a lot of these sort of naturalizing plants, so people who plant matrices of plants, so every foot, 1 foot apart on a grid of grasses and then interplanted with bulbs and interplanted with another perennial, those types of perennials made it in here. So we try not to include the real common ones that but also some of the ones that people, maybe have trouble growing, like hollyhocks, or newer ones in the trade, like alstroemeria. Some of the new hybrids like Allium Millennium, like these have different uses in the garden now, and these plants were not available 7-10 years ago.
Yeah, it's great. And the other thing I really liked about those profiles is that, all right, in this little block you've got a photo of the perennial, but then you have a lot of really useful information, shorthand information about the conditions, sun amount, the heat tolerances.
Pruning. I mean, we've included some, what people think of as rhizomes or bulbs like, bearded iris or cannas even. People often are confused. What do I do with them in the fall? Can I cut them back? Are they hardy in zone 7, which they are, but in zone 6 they're not. So do I dig them up or not?
It's
like a baseball card.
Yeah, it's like a baseball. You're right. It's like a baseball card, but gives you a lot of really good information packed in each one of those cards that makes for a very quick reference. I really like that.
Oh, good. Yeah, it gives you the stats, so you get the basics.
Matt Matt is our guest today. He is an American Horticultural Society member, horticulturist, and author, and we're talking with him about perennials today on the show. You can join in with your questions. The number's 800-642-1234, or you could email us to talk@wpr.org. I'm Larry Mealer for Garden Talk on WPR News. Great to have you along today for Garden Talk. Larry Mealer here with my guest, Matt Mattis, American Horticultural Society member, horticulturist, and author. And the book we're talking about is the AHS book, Essential Guide to Perennial Gardening. And so talking perennials with him, and you can join in at 800-642-1234. Email to talk@wpr.org. Let's take a call from Lucy in Wapaka. Lucy, hello. Thank you for calling. What's on your mind?
Hi. I have a swamp mallow hibiscus. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, I want to propagate it, and I don't know if I should propagate it from seed or...
Oh, we lost Lucy. How does she propagate it? Does she do it from seed or cuttings?
From seed. Yeah, absolutely from seed. So a swamp mallow, you would want to, so it's a hibiscus. It's actually the hibiscus, I believe, that they made marshmallow from, that sort of mucilage that was in the liquid in the stems back in the old days. But it's definitely from seed, like most mallows. And so that's in the hibiscus family. So a Malvaceae would be the hibiscus family. But definitely the seeds, which you would have to stratify for maybe, which means provide them sort of a cold. You could do it in the refrigerator. I probably wouldn't freeze them, even though in the wild they freeze. I think a damp cold, like wrap the seed up in a damp paper towel, put it in a poly bag, put it in your refrigerator for maybe 4 to 6 weeks, and then sow the seeds. You can sow the seeds under lights, and so you could do it a bit early, let's say in March, so maybe the timing is right. So you still have time to chill them and to start them and keep them under lights, of course, until after any threat of frost, and then transplant them out into the garden.
And one of the features of this book, by the way, is propagation. And I know you have some good photos and some good information on plant propagation.
Yeah, there's a whole section on plant propagation. And, propagation could be something as simple as digging up, let's say, a perennial that grew too old in the garden. After 5 or 6 years, they form like a shape like a tire in the ground, so they're dead in the center, and it's a ring. I don't know if you've seen that in your garden, right? So, from that, let's say it's an aster or even a daylily, you can get, 6 plants, maybe even more, and certainly with hostas and things like that, or heuchera. But that's the easiest way. But then also we go into root cuttings, stem cuttings. We mentioned earlier, we talked about the lupin. That's something the old timers used to cut the roots and pot the roots up horizontally in a seed tray, and the root cuttings would grow, or stem cuttings in March, which is how you would propagate delphiniums, for instance.
We get a lot of questions over time about plant propagation, and that's why I thought, this is a valuable source of information in this book, for sure. Lucy, thanks again for calling. Appreciate your call. Let's go to Gianni in Montello next. Hi, Gianni.
Yes, good morning, Matt and Larry. Thank you for taking my call. My question regards lingonberries. I spent some time in central Sweden, and in the summertime, we picked lingonberries in the forest. My question is, are they native to the New World, or were they introduced here? And why aren't they cultivated here like the cranberry? Because they are absolutely delicious, but very, very dear when you buy them.
They are. I agree. I live in a Swedish neighborhood, so in Massachusetts. So I'm familiar with lingonberries. And it's funny you ask this, because I agree with you. I have never seen them offered here or grown here, but they can be, and certainly where you are and where I live in the country. I know they're available now online. You can Google. There's one retailer that sells them, and I'm going to be trying them this year, so I can't speak to how successful they are. But I know that they're sort of a high-acid soil plant like blueberries. It's certainly something worth trying. I can't speak to how well they'll grow, but it seems like they were grown, I know, back in the colonial time. So, and especially through like Nova Scotia, Canada.
Yeah, the soil type is kind of the problem, and people certainly grow lingonberries in Wisconsin, but to make that soil, our basic soil, acidic enough, it requires what should I say? Fairly constant attention to the soil.
Yeah, but I know people who grow them in pots, so it's probably easier to keep.
Yes.
You probably would have to go peat-based, which we're all trying to use less peat these days, but it's probably easier to keep the soil. It's certainly not the temperature, because they're zone 2 plants. You know, so they probably grow better in northern Canada.
Yeah.
Or Sweden.
And the soil type's a little better there too, I think, for them as well. Gianni, there you go. Thank you for calling. Dave and Toma, your turn. Hi, Dave.
Well, I wanted to ask you a couple of things. Blueberries and mulberries. Number one, are mulberries, I've never had one. Are they worth eating? Are they good?
I'm sure there's a mulberry council, but I would say they're not that sweet. I mean, they're ornamental cultivars that have, weeping foliage. You often see these in cemeteries, or it's like a weeping willow form, or fancy leaves on them. But there are cultivars that have very large fruit. But I would say there's probably a reason you don't see mulberry jam sold. at the supermarket, right? But they certainly have their fans. I know they're very popular in Asia, and there are cultivars, which I have not tasted, but that are grown commercially.
Yeah.
I think it's a short-lived plant, and they can be messy. The fruit drops.
Yes, it does. Thank you,
Right.
Dave, for calling. Appreciate your call. And then you have to keep the birds away.
No, well, that's part of the messy part, right? I mean,
Yeah.
don't park under them.
Lynn in Eau Claire, we'll give you a chance to join in. Hi, Lynn.
Hi. This might be a little bit dumb, but can you put weed and seed on your flower beds? I know there's preen, but what about the regular, you buy a big bag for your yard? Can you put that on your flower beds?
I would say just do it carefully. There are plants. Listen, there are plant people. Let's say really plant geeks who grow alpine plants in, a gravel elevated bed, and they actually use, a weed and feed because it doesn't seem to harm some alpine plants. But you need to know what genus you have, what species, and are they sensitive to it? Because obviously, it can kill a weed. So you can certainly, kill half of or everything you have at the same time.
Yeah.
Probably experimented on something first.
Yeah, we could turn to a minute to your section on nutrients and soil chemistry, which I found really interesting. You even had kind of 5 myths about plant nutrients and soil chemistry that I thought were kind of fun and interesting as well.
Yeah, you have to be careful. Of course, in our modern world, we're more educated, we're more sensitive to what we put in our soil, on our soil, the health of our soil, the microorganisms, and I think any serious gardener would say don't use a weed and feed. But I do know people that use it, say, on a lawn or in a garden, maybe where you're growing a monoculture or one plant that is sensitive to it. I mean, environmentally, it's probably not wise, but that's a decision that's up to you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the myths you had, organic is always safe.
Oh, right. I mean, I think chemicals are chemicals, and this comes up all the time amongst plant people on, what's a good source of nitrogen. And, we may have one that, comes from the oil industry, but also will a plant know the difference between the chemicals? So the chemistry obviously factors in. I guess the best bit of advice is just educate yourself as much as possible to what you're putting on. An organic insecticide or herbicide can be just as dangerous. Vinegar, in many ways, is more dangerous to your soil than another chemical source, but it's an acid. It's still a chemical. So just be careful.
Diana in Gladstone, Michigan. It's your turn. Hi.
Okay, Larry and guest. Hello. So we moved into a new house last year, and I have 2 gardens, and one is completely shady, and the other one is partially sunny, but like half is sunny, so half the side grows good, but the other half doesn't. Of course, I wasn't thinking when I put it in. So I'm just wondering, 2 questions. Anything flowering that I could actually put in a more shady area and that the deer won't eat?
Well, that's a good thing. I'm glad you brought up deer because this book is I'm impressed with how many of these plants that are in here that the deer will not eat, or there's no plant a deer won't eat, but let's say deer resistant. Either might be because the leaves are furry or they're prickly or the plant doesn't taste good. But on the shady side, there are certainly things like Alchemilla mollis, that's a lady's mantle that has beautiful lime green flowers and foamy airiness, and you could have campanulas coming out of that. I personally have a mostly shady garden, so I know there are a lot of things. Podophyllum, things that have interesting foliage do well. Kerengi shoma, I think we overlook those plants that bloom in September, October. Kerengi shoma from Korea has beautiful golden waxy bells. there are plenty of plants in here that you could grow in shade. Columbine, certainly.
Yeah, there are a number of them, but it's a question that we often get, Matt. People would love to have flowers, blooming in shade.
Yeah. Well, an easy way around that is go to your local garden center, but just don't go in May. Go through the summer months and go into late summer, autumn. Something like, an astilbe may not be blooming till June or July, and so many of us just go to the garden center in May and June, and that's it. So you'll see what's in bloom, and then you can choose the colors you want. And especially getting later into summer, that's when I think a lot of shade gardens tend to go. Either the ephemerals go away and you're left with not much, or just grasses or hosta. But you certainly can find more interesting plants to be added in late summer, fall, too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip, for sure. Diana, thanks again for calling. You can join in too, 800-642-1234, or you could email to talk@wpr.org. Get you on pretty quickly. Nancy in Watoma emailed to ask what perennials to plant on top of a septic drain field. She would love to restore a lawn area with prairie plants, and she appreciates deep-rooted perennials impacting, or she's apprehensive about deep-rooted perennials impacting the drain field.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have experience planting on a drain field, but I have planted on them. Things like peonies, or is it full sun?
Well, I don't know.
Yes, no. Yeah. So, obviously, it's probably better than lawn. Your grass is usually greener there, right?
Yeah.
High nitrogen. I don't know. I think you'd have to. I would think there's more plants that grow there than don't. Is it if it's an active drain field too? I'm not sure how deep. When she is talking about deep-rooted perennials,
she was a little worried about them having some impact on the drain field. I would suggest, and I know for sure, for example, that Prairie Nursery in Plainfield, Wisconsin, has a list of prairie plants that can grow on a drain field. And that person might just check Prairie Nursery or some of the other native plant nurseries that are in the state and take a look at their website, because I know they do offer some possibilities. So certainly worth a look. Miranda emailed to ask what seeds should be winter sowed for perennials. She wants to use milk jugs and a water bottle method, and did start a few already, including hollyhock, lupin, and poppies. Are there others she should and could still put out, or is it better to start inside now?
Yes, that's a really good question. Personally, I don't support the milk jug method at all. You probably would only limit that to seedlings that don't mind being transplanted. Things like poppies or even lupins when they get larger, or milkweed don't want their roots disturbed at all. So unless you put 3 seeds in a jug that are 2 inches, 3 inches apart, and you can carefully separate them, I would never tear. I've seen this, often suggested on social media, tear the root ball off. But cold seed starting outdoors certainly is one method. Mine sit in 2 or 3 inch pots right now with gravel on top, outside in the snow, no covering. So the idea of making a mini greenhouse, which is the method of taking a milk jug, heats it up too warm on a sunny day, especially in February and March, then it gets down cold again at night, is not helping those plants at all. They're much better if they germinate naturally, let's say in mid-April, early May, for pots that have been outside all winter. For those that require it, you would have to look online and see which, but I see a lot of suggestions, again, on social media, of plants that really don't need to be started in especially poppies, for instance, which do not need cold stratification at all. The fact that they can survive in the cold is, I think, confuses people. There's no need to sow on snow. They germinate at 80 degrees, 90 degrees, or that first warm spring day. So you're better off sowing those maybe later in spring than in the winter.
Yeah, and it reminds me about climate. We have a rapidly changing climate. How much should we consider that when selecting perennials?
Well, I mean, I suppose there's good news there that we can start trying some different warmer ones that are better in warmer climates or zones. But, at least here in New England, we get unpredictable springs. I don't know what you have there, but
yes.
Perennials that emerge too quickly, let's say, in spring, because let's say we had a warm winter and they started growing, and then we have a cold spell and it's 10 degrees, it's 5 degrees for 3 days, and that new growth is damaged. That happens more often now than it ever has before. So we're all trying to navigate those waters now.
Yeah, for sure. Gail is on the road to Madison and couldn't stay with us, but wondering if Milorganite is good to work into the soil of her perennial beds in the spring.
Oh, that's a great question. I can't answer it. I've never used it.
Yeah, it's
It's like a high nitrogen seed, right?
Yeah.
Or at least, it's more like fish fertilizer in a way, I think, in its formula. So it's, I would, just looking at the analysis of it, I would put it on snow or earlier in the year before plants are emerging.
Merritt in Wausau emailed to say they aren't flowering, but ferns are very deer resistant, and there are so many beautiful types of ferns available.
That's a good point. Yeah, and I love ferns. We keep adding more and more to our garden, and they just look great too.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt Mattis, our guest today, I should mention, coming up in the second hour of the show, we'll be taking a look at buying and caring for houseplants with the owner of the Madison Greenhouse store, Tiffany Olson. So that's later on. Right now, though, we're looking at perennials with Matt. And you can join in. The number to call, 800-642-1234, or you could email us to talk@wpr.org. I'm Larry Mealer for Garden Talk on WPR News. You're listening to Garden Talk here on WPR News. Larry Mealer here. Just a quick reminder, on Monday, our regular physical therapy experts are back to talk about resistance training for seniors, and then at 12:30, we'll look at efforts to bring improving health messaging to central Wisconsin. So looking forward to that. Right now, visiting about perennials. And Judy in Madison has a question for you, Matt.
Hello.
Hi, Judy.
I had a pot of calla lilies last fall, and as they faded and died, I saved the seeds. So what do you recommend now for doing with those seeds in order to maybe get them to grow?
Okay.
All right. So, Julie, you had seeds, or are the bulbs in the pot?
No, the seeds that were at the blossoms.
Oh, okay. So those you can sow right away. Hopefully, there's still. I'm not sure if they'll still be vital or not, but they're really a berry. It's an aroid, so they're more like berry-like. But I would try sowing now. I have not grown them from seed. I've only divided the bulbs. Do you still have the pot?
Yes, I do.
So I would dig down into the pot and see if there's, a bulb still down in there, and that's sort of your backup plan. and start watering that and see how that grows.
Okay. There you go, Judy. Thank you for calling. Jen in Ashland, will go to you now. Hi, Jen.
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to comment, the gentleman that called earlier about lingonberries, I live up near Ashland, and I grow them in a raised bed. I have a lot of pine trees, so my native soil is really acidic. So I use the soil from my yard in the raised beds. And I have about 8 plants. They're very small. and they do really well. They don't produce a ton of berries, but we get enough for a few handfuls, and we stew them and put them on pancakes or crepes or what have you. So they're pretty easy to grow, and I would totally encourage him to give it a try.
All right.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jen. And Matt, I should tell you that we have a pretty broad audience here, and the audience consists of everything from first-time gardeners to folks who have completed the many iterations of the Master Gardener program. So oftentimes if somebody asks a question, somebody will pipe up with their experience, which is always good to have. Thanks again, Jen. Karen in St. Croix Falls will go to you now. Hi, Karen.
Hello.
Hi, what's on your mind?
Happy Valentine's Day.
To you as well.
I bought a new house, and I am an avid gardener, but I've always wanted a perennial garden. And what is the number one tip you can give me for starting out? I'm thinking you're going to say the soil, but I'm all ears.
I'm going to say the soil. Well, listen, if your new house is a new construction?
Yes, and I'm going to be landscaping.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's nothing you can't overcome. The problem with new construction homes is often the ground is the soil's too compacted. When we built our greenhouse here, we had tractors come in and ran over, 150-year-old garden, and then it took 10 years for the garden to come back to normal because the soil is compacted. But so you'll probably have to condition your soil a bit, add some conditioner, and I'm not sure what your soil's like, but you should know as an experienced gardener once you turn it over, if it's too disturbed or it's, maybe they brought soil in, you may have to enhance the soil. But you absolutely this is the time to start a perennial garden.
Yeah, absolutely. Karen, good luck with it. Thank you very much for calling. That compacted soil would be a...
Yeah, organic matter, get a lot in there. Compost, if you can even order it from a place, or even turning in, composted wood bark. Order a big load of mulch and let it sit for a year or two, and then add that in too.
Yeah, good points. Karen, good luck. Thank you. Joel in Green Bay up next. Hi, Joel.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm new to gardening in the house, and I was wondering if I would be able to grow some perennials in the house. I have a few plants already, and they're doing really good. I have a south-facing window, which is the only window that faces south, so I'm limited to that. I was wondering if I could grow perennials in the house.
That's an interesting question, a popular thing to do in the 19th century, especially in colder climates, where people would dig, astilbes, for instance, were often sold as an Easter plant or even at Valentine's Day forced. So, I mean, obviously they're outdoor plants. They need a dormant and cool period to rest. Maybe you have a garage or you have someplace outside where they can go for a bit, but bring them back indoors. I mean, technically, most houseplants are perennials, but they're tropical. But it's going to take some experimentation. But I know that Tova Martin, the writer, is working on an article for us for a future issue on growing perennials in the house. I think it's more about forcing perennials in, so you have a cool bedroom or unheated room that you can bring them in. But I say go for it. You're going to have to learn on the way with this one because I don't think there's a lot of information out there if they're garden perennials. But if they're growing for you, go for it.
And we'll be talking about houseplants coming up in our next segment, and I can raise that issue with our guest at that time as well, who works a lot with houseplants. Joel, so thank you for calling. Carmen in Sturgeon Bay will turn to you next. Hi, Carmen.
Oh, good morning. I'm calling because I have a prickly pear cactus in a flower garden that I need to move this spring, and I'm looking for some recommendations on transplanting a prickly pear cactus.
And gloves?
Yeah, gloves.
Yeah. Well, I would try and move it early before the new pads come out. And, some of the tricks that people have is they use rolled up newspaper. I mean, if they still have newspapers, and kind of wrap and use that to pick the plant up with. But if you're doing it with a shovel, do it before the new growth, because those new pads can be very limp. You don't want them to limp and not be turgid full of water. Or wait until they've matured, let's say in July or late June, and move it then.
All right, Carmen, there you go. Thank you so much for calling. Leslie in Cottage Grove emailed back to mulberries for a minute. She has a mulberry tree and harvests and freezes as much as she can. She thinks they're a superfood. She eats them on her cereal every day. They don't have much taste, but if they're an easy and free superfood, that's fine with her. Biggest benefit with mulberries, it attracts lots of birds. The most entertaining guests are the cedar waxwings, of course. They eat the overripe berries and, get drunk and fly around intoxicated. Truly a hoot.
That's great. Well, they are a superfood. They're high in vitamin C, that's for sure. The birds know that.
Phil in Mount Horeb, we'll go to you. Hi, Phil.
Hey. I'd love to know what that proper dimension is for cold or duration for setting seeds that need that cold period.
That's a really good question. There's a lot of confusion about this and a lot of misinformation. I'm going to give you a book to go look for online. It's a free PDF you can download. It's at a lot of rock garden sites. It's called Seed Germination Theory and Practice, and it's by Dr. Norman Deno, D-E-N-O. And it's like a 300-page photocopied book that's been passed around, plant collectors for, 15, 20 years now. But it will tell you what seeds need to be stratified for how long and which ones don't. Like, Rudbeckia. I mean, a lot of people are sowing those in jugs. They don't need to be chilled. Or foxgloves, or, as I said earlier, poppies. In fact, all the annual poppies do not need to be cold. They all germinate above 70, ideally closer to 90. So it really depends on every plant. And but, even like cardinal flower doesn't need to be chilled at all.
So I'm sure there are people saying, wait a minute, what was the title of that free book?
Yeah, it's called, say it slowly, Seed Germination Theory and Practice. It's a bit of a sciencey book, but there's a lot of information in there. I think there's probably over 1,000 plants listed. And the author's name is Norman C. Deno, D-E-N-O. He was a professor of chemistry.
Phil, there you go. Thank you so much for calling. I appreciate your call. In the book, the book, again, I'll give the title of the book where we've been sort of zeroing in a bit on. The title is Essential Guide to Perennial Gardening. That's the main title. The subtitle, Techniques and Know-How for Planting and Tending Low-Maintenance Perennial Plantings. A really nice book filled with photos and written in a way that any of us can understand, which I also like a whole lot. And in the book, you talk about gardening as an ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a real trend now, and there are good reasons for it. I think we forget, right? The garden's part of our ecosystem.
Yeah, and become a kind of an ecosystem in and of itself, I should say.
It is, and it's not just saying grow only natives. Certainly there are guides in the book where if you're interested in growing only natives, you can. But I think the reality is we're mixing a little bit of everything: Asiatic plants from around the world, which is important too because diversity is important in the plant world. There are trilliums here in North America, and there are even more trillium species elsewhere in the world, and maybe some of those are endangered, or Mayaples in China are endangered, so we maybe should have all 6 species in our garden here to help keep, the whole genus alive. So we try to encourage, build the garden you want, but also build it in a smart way so the ecology of that garden is good for the plants, for the wildlife, and for you.
I was thinking about some of the perennial beds that I have. I have a perennial bed between the sidewalk and the street. So it's a
Wow.
fairly narrow area, but
Yeah.
it's really pretty throughout the summer. If I ever sell my house, I'm going to sell it in July because all of those perennials, or many of them, are in full bloom at that time.
Oh, yeah, smart.
But they've been in now for quite a while, and I'm wondering about dividing. They're great because they last a long time, but in many cases that means you need to divide at some point. How do you know when to do it?
Well, it depends on the plant, of course, but it is safe to say that not all perennials want to be divided, first of all. So, something, again, like it's a lupin or a peony or something that has a brittle root or a deep root or a baptisia. I mean, good luck trying to divide that. But the ones that you will notice them slowly spreading and forming a clump, those generally are, should be divided or repotted, and given away to friends and family every 3 to 5 years. The plants will just be better, and you're getting a lot of free plants.
Yeah, you really are. Another question here we've got: many perennials bloom once a year. Are there ways to increase bloom time on perennials?
Not really, but there are ways to, depending on the perennial, there are ways to delay bloom or to encourage a longer season. So let's say, something that, let's say a phlox. If it's a tall phlox in your perennial border and you do what they call the Chelsea chop, which is you pinch out the stems in end of May or beginning of June, that could delay blooming. But a trick is to perhaps do that to only half your stems. So the first batch will bloom in June and then into July, and the ones that you pinched will bloom a little bit later, like 3 or 4 weeks later.
That's a very, very...
Veronica, you can do that with, too.
Yeah, that's a very, very good tip. And I think for some natives, when you put the seeds in, will make a difference on flowering as well. Some flower late, some flower early. And so when you put those seeds in, you need to keep that in mind as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's challenging today because you buy plants at garden centers, and a lot of these plants came from, gardens further south than where you live. Around here, they come maybe from Pennsylvania, so they're 2 zones ahead of us in the spring, but they want to sell these plants when they're in bloom. But the following year in your own garden, they may bloom 4 weeks later than they did the year before.
Yeah.
So it's a little misleading. So this book, we try to put out the actual timing of these plants.
So how do people get the American Horticultural Society book, Essential Guide to Perennial Gardening?
Well, the book is available, let's say, wherever books are sold, but definitely on Amazon and other online book sources. It's called The Essential Guide to Perennial Gardening, and you'll see right on the cover the big pink flower logo for the American Horticultural Society. There's a companion book that's called Organic Vegetable Gardening. It's the same shape and sort of same design cover, so it's a great companion to that. But they're both out now. They just were published and available across the country.
Yeah, and it's a dandy book on perennials, I'll tell you that for sure. Matt, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. I hope we can do this again. Would you be willing to come back at some point?
I would love to. Thank you, Larry.
It's been a pleasure. Matt Mattis, American Horticultural Society member, horticulturist, and author, and the book we've been talking about again, Essential Guide to Perennial Gardening, subtitled Techniques and Know-How for Planning, Planting, and Tending Low-Maintenance Perennial Plantings. Take a look at it for sure. Coming up, we're going to talk about houseplants. That's next. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Great to have you along for this edition of Garden Talk. And by the way, are you a houseplant lover? Today on Garden Talk, we have an indoor plant expert with us to answer your questions. Our guest, Tiffany Olson, is a lifelong lover of plants, 20 years of experience in the industry. She's the owner of the Madison Greenhouse Store. It's located on Williamson Street, or Willie Street, as we usually say here in Madison. It's on the east side of the city, somewhat near where I live, as a matter of fact. I can walk there, and I would say maybe 15, 20 minutes. It's just a nice walk for me. What about you as we talk houseplants? How can she help you with your houseplants? You can join in by calling us at 800-642-1234. It's 1-800-642-1234. Or you could send an email to talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. Tiffany Olson, welcome. Thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you've been doing this 20 years or so now. How'd you get started? How'd your love of houseplants get started?
Well, my love of houseplants got started by necessity of living in Wisconsin. I moved up here from Texas, and there I was really into a lot of plants that we would just grow outside and bring in for 1 month in January. With the logistics here, houseplants became a necessity and a great joy.
Yeah, and tell us about your store, Madison Greenhouse Store. Give a little history of that and when it opened and so forth.
So the store opened almost 12 years ago. My friend Jordan Hosking founded it. He has the Wisconsin Greenhouse Company, and he builds greenhouses. And he thought it'd be fun to have a garden shop on Willie Street because we all really love our neighborhood. And after a couple of years, he realized he just wants to build greenhouses. And I was really excited to have the opportunity to take over the business. We're located in the historic Way House of Light that was Mona Bolivar's hippie commune artist place. It's a really neat old building and a really great neighborhood.
Yeah, it really is. And I love that neighborhood, just as an aside. You look at, in that about 2-block area, there's something like 25, 30 local businesses that really a lot of fun and interesting and enjoyable to visit.
It really is. I made a map of the local businesses, and it was very hard to fit them all on the map.
In a very short stretch of streets there, for sure. Well, what kinds of plants, you carry a pretty broad range, but talk about the kinds of plants that you carry.
We carry lots of plants that do well in homes. There's a lot of plants that can do well in Wisconsin, and not all plants are going to be happy in a Wisconsin home. So we try and focus on ones that will do well in your house. For example, ZZ plants, snake plants do really well. We're really into peperomias and money trees because they're pet safe. A ton of our clientele come in and want a plant, but they have a rambunctious cat. And so we really try and make sure to have options like peperomias and Hoyas and money trees, Phytonias that are safe for their pets.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that always comes up. Kristen had emailed to ask what plants you suggest to help. Well, a couple of things. She wonders about cleaning the air in her apartment and which plants make it that smell good. We got a lot of questions here. Cleaning the air, smelling good, and are pet friendly. She has a dog and a cat.
The combination is a little difficult.
I guess so.
So the studies that NASA did back in the 80s, a lot of those plants, are really great specifically, but really all plants are going to filter your air. The key is that you need a large plant. If a plant doesn't have a lot of leaf surface, then their ability to clean the air is much less, really depending on the size of your space. For smell good, I assume that's part of the air freshening because most houseplants don't have a smell. But of the ones that have been specifically studied, most are not pet friendly. The only one I can think of off the top of my head is a parlor palm, and that would be totally pet friendly and is known to be good at filtering the air. The problem with a parlor palm, the Neanthbella, is they're really attractive to cats. And so while it's safe for the cat, when it flutters in the wind, the leaves are very enticing. So sometimes that can be a problem. Ponytail palms, also parlor palms and ponytail palms are both great, but again, attractive to cats.
So what does a parlor palm look like? Describe that for me.
It's a classic house plant. I think it dates back to the Victorian age. It's a shorter palm that is more bushy. It doesn't have, a trunk like a palm tree. It's more of like a shrub with lots of little leaflets. And so it's nice because you have a lot of foliage. They can be more difficult in Wisconsin. Another issue with them is humidity in the winter. So you can humidify them and help them, and that also helps you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that houseplant craze that started during the pandemic, maybe give us an overview of what happened during that time.
Well, it was fascinating. I had only been the owner of the store for 2.5 years or so at the time. So I was still getting my, solid footing, and all of a sudden everybody wanted everything. And I mean, it was crazy. There was so much demand. I couldn't get a golden pothos for a while, and that's the most basic possible houseplant. Florida just ran out of plants. I think everybody, was cooped up inside. They realized maybe their house is kind of boring and they need live green friends to help purify the air, give them something to watch grow. I think it was a really healthy endeavor for people to get into. And I'm happy to report that it seems that a lot of people that started getting really excited about houseplants during COVID are still doing so.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, it's a supply-demand kind of thing. So prices, of course, went up when, Florida's running out of its plants, as an example. Have prices kind of settled, or I should say leveled off, or?
Prices have definitely leveled off. Normal houseplants have increased in price with inflation and costs, increasing with, how that's part of everything. But with the rare plants that became really popular during COVID, there was such demand and they were hard to get that people were able to charge just insane prices. And a lot of those things are now, very available, and the prices plummeted, which is nice. That's become affordable for people to obtain these exotic and fun plants.
Yeah. What are some of the new, or let me say newer plants that have been introduced and say in the last decade or so that you like and you use and sell?
I'm a really big fan of the Raven ZZ and the Supernova ZZ. They're both ZZ plants, but they have dark foliage. And then the new foliage comes in chartreuse green. So it's just kind of a really fun, different plant. There's been a lot of really interesting monsteras that have come out that are now approachable for people. The problem with them is that they quickly grow too big for what a lot of people can handle. So I do appreciate the dark colored ZZs having the ability to stay compact and remain part of your life and not become a problem.
Yeah. Speaking of Monstera, Sid had emailed to ask why his Monstera keeps losing leaves in the winter time. He waters it regularly, and they have plant lights on it. And why does he keep getting mushrooms growing in his houseplants?
Well, he may be overwatering his houseplants.
That's what it sounds like.
It's a very common problem. The vast majority of people, when I give advice, I find that they're overwatering their plants. It could also be the soil may be just too rich for the plants to cause the mushrooms. But it can be good for most plants to let the top of the soil dry out. If you keep it always moist, you'll get mushroom or mold growth. For monsteras dropping leaves in the winter, that's very common. It's great that they have a grow light on it. My guess would be if you have a grow light with consistent lighting, then the plant doesn't actually know that it's winter as much. except from the temperature drop in your house and the humidity drop. So I would consider maybe it would be good to increase humidity. However, if this person has a mushroom problem from growing in their soil, then maybe that's not helpful.
So the Monstera for that particular plant, then, in terms of watering, waiting for the top soil part to sort of dry a little bit before you add water, or what's the best way?
Yes, I would definitely suggest allowing the top 1 to 2 inches of the soil to dry pretty much completely before you then water well. And once you water well, you want all of the soil to absorb the water. Don't just pour it in one spot. And then after a little bit, make sure you drain whatever water is left in the saucer. You don't want it to be sitting in water for too long.
Yeah. So you said top 2 inches?
It depends on the size of the plant.
Of course.
If the plant is larger, 2 inches. If it's a smaller plant, maybe more like 1 inch.
Tiffany Olson, our guest today. She is the owner of Madison Greenhouse Store. Great to have her with us as we talk houseplants. And you can join in too. Number to call 800-642-1234. Or you could email us. The email address, talk@wpr.org. I'm Larry Mealer for Garden Talk on WPR News. You're listening to Garden Talk here on WPR News. Larry Mealer here with my guest, Tiffany Olson. She is the owner of Madison Greenhouse Store. We're talking with her about houseplants. I just want to mention, I hope you can join us next week for our first book club book of the year on the Larry Mealer Show Book Club. This one is a novel. It's titled Snowbirds, written by Christina Clancy, a good writer. It's a story of a couple who kind of flee winter in the Midwest for Palm Springs, where they find their relationship at a crossroads. I just finished it yesterday or the day before. It's a really good read. And we'll be talking with Christina on Thursday of next week, and I'm looking forward to it. Still have time to read it, and you can join in too, whether you've read it or not. But what about houseplants? Questions about houseplants? I hope you'll join in. The number's 800-642-1234. Email to talk@wpr.org. Perry in Oconto, Wisconsin, has a question. Let's go there. Hi, Perry.
Hello. I have a Norfolk pine, and you were talking about watering, and I thought it would be a good time to call in. I have a Norfolk pine, and I'm not exactly sure if I'm watering too much or too little. I'm thinking maybe too little, but some of the ends of the branches or the tips of the branches, they're kind of brown. And this is a Norfolk pine I've had for many years. I originally had put a crocheted angel on top, and the top grew through the angel. Now it's going back down towards the floor. So it keeps it from hitting the ceiling, I guess, but that's about it.
Have you transplanted it or replanted it at all, Perry?
I have not replanted it in many years, but I do fertilize it. Only in the late spring through early fall.
Okay. And how do you fertilize it, or what do you use?
I use a regular houseplant fertilizer called Monty. I think it's an 8-16-8, like that.
What do you think, Tiffany?
I think it's probably time for a repot. I imagine that the soil after all of these years has become hydrophobic and condensed down, and so that it can't really absorb the water. If you haven't really changed your watering, then my guess would be it's time. I would wait another month or two, but I would suggest repotting it in a really high quality fertile soil. And then once you do repot it, I would kind of pull back on the fertilizing for a little bit while it uses the nutrition available in the soil that you have it in. In the meantime, I would suggest maybe trying to soak it. It's possible that the soil is pulled back from the sides of the pot and you're just not really getting any water to it. So it might be good to have just an initial, before springtime, deep soak.
and then of course drain the water out of the holding pan.
Yes, yes, but I would if the soil is really seized up and not accepting water, sometimes people will just pour water in and then it will get to the drainage saucer without absorbing at all. So sometimes I think it can be good to let it actually sit in water for like an hour and really absorb the water. Some people will do this with bottom watering and actually only water from the bottom so that the plant sucks up what it needs and the soil really is able to accept it.
Oh, good points. Good tips there. Perry, good luck with it. Thank you very much for calling. Let's turn to Carla in Coleman, Wisconsin. Hi, Carla.
Hi, how are you?
Great. Appreciate the call. What's on your mind?
I bring in all my coleus from the summer and I grow them in the winter, and some of them do really well and some of them don't. And I'm just wondering if there is a trick to keep most of them growing until next spring or in a few months when I can take them back outside.
Do you put them all in the same place when you bring them in? So do they all get the same light and so forth?
Most of them are in the east windows, so they get the morning sun. I would say there's one there that doesn't do well, and then there's another one that's over by my patio door that doesn't do well, but the other ones are doing well. So it just sort of, I have a bunch of them. But I love coleus, and I'm just wondering if there's some tricks to keep them growing.
All right. Tiffany, what do you think?
Well, if you have some doing well and some not, I would guess that part of it might be the location. Coleus, in my experience, are somewhat cold sensitive, so I would be concerned about the one by the patio door. And if you've been opening that door, it may be exposing it to too much cold, especially this winter. Coleus also, in my personal experience, are very prone to mealybugs indoors. When you bring them in, it's very possible that they could be showing up in January and February. So I would do a good inspection of each plant and make sure you don't have any mealybugs hiding on the leaves or on the stems. If your plant is looking super sad and you just kind of want to do a Hail Mary, coleus propagate really well in water, especially water with perlite. So you could potentially do cuttings from the plants that aren't looking super hot and just put them in some purified water with some chunky perlite in a vase, just stem cuttings, and let them reroot. And then you can start fresh again in the spring.
That's a very good idea as well. Carla, good luck. Appreciate that call. Bruce in La Crosse, we'll go to you next. Hi, Bruce.
Yeah, good afternoon. I bought some tulip bulbs in October and put them in the refrigerator, hoping to force start them this spring. When is the best time for me to begin that process?
You said you put them in the fridge in October?
Yes, about mid-October, correct.
So generally forcing tulips, you'll want to do 10 to 12 weeks in the fridge. Traditionally, people will do it planted into soil first to kind of more recreate the outside conditions. So if you didn't do that, I would consider, it's not the normal method, but you could plant them into soil now and put them back in the fridge for a little while and see if they can maybe get started and learn which direction is up before you want to bring them out and propagate them in your home to force them. But if you did have them in since October, we have had enough cold months since then that you should be at the time that is correct for forcing.
Yeah. It's always fun, isn't it, to have those tulips, in the house come up. They're so beautiful. Really get you thinking about spring and summer. Bruce, there you go. Thank you so much for calling. You can join in too. The number's 800-642-1234. Email to talk@wpr.org, which gets you on pretty quickly here. Mary emailed, she would love to get some spring plants or new houseplants, but it seems as though the fungus gnats are always an added bonus, so to speak.
Fungus gnats are really definitely a great frustration and always a concern when you're introducing a new plant into your home. In some situations, they're somewhat impossible to avoid. So it's always good to quarantine your plants. If you first bring a plant home and you cover the soil with sand or something to break the life cycle, you can keep the ones in the soil from coming out, and you may be able to stop the new introductions from having those issues to begin with. Otherwise, if you want to start treating preemptively, people like to use mosquito bits, which is a bacterium that only kills mosquito and fungus gnat larvae. That can be super helpful to mix into the soil or into your water. But I am a big fan of the breaking the life cycle of covering the surface of the soil, so that when the bugs are flying around, they can't land on the soil. And then when the young ones hatch and come out, they can't get out. And if you can stop that transaction at the surface level, you can save yourself a lot of heartache.
How much would you need to put, how much sand would you need to put on top?
At least a quarter of an inch, probably more like half an inch. You can also use like a really fine crushed glass, is much more attractive than sand. But it needs to be pretty solid, especially because then when you go to water the plants, you might be disturbing that layer. A lot of people do bottom water as well in an effort to help reduce fungus gnats, since they're attracted to the top of the soil being moist. If it's only moist below the surface, then that can also help reduce them.
That's a good idea as well. And you mentioned mealybugs earlier. If you have mealybugs, how do you get rid of them?
It depends on how bad your mealybugs are and the conditions you're in. There is a systemic chemical that you can apply into the soil if it's a last-ditch attempt to save a family heirloom. But generally speaking, rubbing alcohol is a really great method. I like to mix rubbing alcohol with water and insecticidal soap and spray the whole plant down. Do that a couple of times, and then as the later ones arrive, go in with a Q-tip and straight rubbing alcohol and zap them. And it's quite fun because their little fuzzy white outer coating shrivels up, and at least you get to see the activity happening as you are murdering the mealybugs. And you can be really specific. If it's not a bad infestation and you catch it early, you can absolutely just spot treat with alcohol. Make sure you check in thoroughly at each part of the plant once a week in perpetuity. If you're going to do just a spray down method, I found it takes about 2 months of treating once a week, and then you're pretty good to go.
So that spray down, what's the ratio of the various ingredients there?
People's opinions vary. I like to go nuclear.
Nuclear?
Nuclear. Yeah. I'll use straight for the zapping. For my spray bottles, I'll do 50% water, 50% alcohol, and a splash of insecticidal soap. I think that you need to do at least probably 1 part to 4 parts alcohol to make it viable. Not all plants are going to want to be zapped with this. Anything with a fuzzy leaf like a purple passion or a African violet, as the alcohol evaporates, it can cause scarring and chilling on the leaves that you want to avoid. But in my opinion, you can go really strong as long as it's not too often. And as long as you're making sure for you that you have good air ventilation. I would not spray your plant with 50% rubbing alcohol in a closed condition. It's not fun to breathe.
Got to say, I love your website. I went to your website, and one of your categories is the murder department, which tells us what you have to get rid of things like mealybugs and other things as well. So that's kind of fun. Elizabeth in Auburndale, we'll give you a chance to join in. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, good afternoon, Larry. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Hey, at Christmas time, I was at my local grocery store, and of course, they have these little Christmas trees that they spray decorations, quote unquote, onto to make them prettier. I'm fundamentally opposed to that, but at that time of the year, I could see that these little guys were going to end up in the dumpster, so I rescued a dozen of them. and brought them home. I have lots of houseplants. I have nice southern exposure windows, but I've noticed that some of them are doing just fantastically and some are not. And I'm getting a lot of dry tips on the ends of some of the little trees. I'm treating them all the same, and I turn them 2 or 3 times a week like I do all my houseplants. And they're all getting the same treatment, but some are not doing as well as others. Any tips for me?
So they still have the spray on it. Was the decoration like a litter, or were they like spray painted?
Purged all that yuck off of them, put them in bigger pots because they were terribly root bound. And, I gave them a big upgrade, cleaned them up, and they bounced back really well. And they've been doing well consistently, except now, like I said, 2 or 3 of them have these crispy ends on the branches, which is, to me, a signal that something's not right.
Yeah, I would agree that it seems like something's not right, but it sounds like you've done everything right. And if they're all getting the same treatment, I really, I don't know what I would suggest might be the issue. If they all have fresh soil and similar watering and similar locations, so maybe temperature or drafts are not an issue.
Yeah.
Could you I would suggest maybe moving the ones that are sad to a more fancy location. If you can give them like a spot in your shower, or not in your shower, but somewhere with great humidity, somewhere just really posh, send them to a spa for a little while, see if they cheer up.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. And maybe you want to get them away from the other plants anyway. If there's something wrong with those 3, I'd be sorely tempted to get them away from the other ones, just for fear something might transfer from one plant to the next. But I think that's great advice, Tiffany. Thanks very much for that question, Elizabeth. Krista in Madison, we'll go to you. Hi, Krista.
Hey there. So I have a Buddha temple. It's a succulent. And when I got it, it was looking okay, but then I noticed that some of the leaves were getting a little yellow. And I think it's something that's supposed to be watered once or twice, maybe a winter. And so I put it in a different soil, a cactus soil. And then I finally got a water meter that told me that the soil was wet. And so the leaves are getting a little bit more yellow. It's coming up the Buddha temple. The top of it's pretty green still, but I'm just not sure if it can be saved.
If you still have a lot of green, happy, leafy parts of the plant, it's probably savable. If the base of the stem is very mushy, you may need to chop it and propagate it and reroot it. It should be pretty easy to do that. Are the yellow leaves down low, or are they at the top of the plant?
They are down low.
That's good news. I would suggest, if it's going kind of fast and you feel like you want to, make a big change because you think it's inevitable that the decline is going to continue, I would suggest cutting it with very clean pruners and making sure that the stem portion that you're cutting into is all green with no brown, and then let that dry for a few days and reroot it and try and start again. Buddha's temple is a relative of the jades, and so it should be very easy to propagate and maybe just start again with some fresh soil and a new root system.
All right, Krista, there you go. Thank you so much for calling. Appreciate your call. And you can join in 800-642-1234. Give a call with your houseplant question or experience. Love to hear from you. Colleen in Cumberland emailed to ask if you have any tips on. Well, here's a gal with Colleen wondering about shamrocks. I wonder why. Anyway, she wonders if you have any tips on wintering shamrocks. She plants them outside in the summer, digs them up, and brings them in for winter, but they don't do well. My son keeps his shamrock in a sunny window, and his flourishes. Her daughter keeps her shamrock in a cool north window, and hers flourishes as well. What am I doing wrong? She plants them outside in the summer, digs them up, and brings them in for winter.
So It's interesting because her kids are doing the two different methods you can do. You can either keep it alive and pretend that winter didn't happen, or you can give it kind of a dormancy period and have it sleep through the winter and then come back again in the spring. I feel like my one question would be maybe that if she has the suggestion from the kids then to do those two different methods, perhaps she's digging it up too late. Perhaps like she's leaving it in the ground too long, or maybe disturbing the roots too much. Sometimes people will plant plants like that in the plastic pot, and then when you want to bring it in the fall, you can just remove the plastic pot from the soil, and you're not disturbing the corms that are hiding underground.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I was thinking about the leaves and dropping leaves and so forth. I've had a lime tree that would drop its leaves, but it's a plant that would replace it with winter leaves, shall we say? Just a leaves that will do better in a little bit lower light conditions, and that's something I think a lot of plants do, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. As they start that process, although it is a little scary, for sure. Pam in Wausau, what's on your mind?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I love ivy, all different kinds, variegated, English, what have you. And in 40 years, I've never been able to keep one alive or get it to grow. I can grow all kinds of other plants successfully, but never an ivy. What are the tricks?
And what do you know? What kind of ivy do you have there?
I've tried variegated. I've tried English ivy. I've tried lots of different ivies over the years.
Okay.
My experience with ivy is that they are cursed to spider mites. I actually don't have them in my store in the winter because it is almost impossible to not have them just be a magnet for spider mites. So I would suggest if you get one, treat it like it always has spider mites. If you want to do like a week treatment of neem very often, that could be helpful. Just cleaning off the leaves. I'm a big fan of Crockett that used to write a lot of garden books and had a show. And he suggests giving your plants a shower once a week, washing them down. And I think that could be a really good thing for an ivy. So you can kind of recreate the outdoor conditions where those leaves would get washed off, and you don't have a perfect scenario for the spider mites. With dry air inside in the winter and then just ivies being ivies, there's such magnets for spider mites that I'm guessing that many of the times you've struggled, it's been because of that. I do know they're easy to propagate if you want to put some cuttings in water. So it might be something where if you find that it's struggling, you could try and save the plant in that way.
Yeah, that's another good tip as well. Pam, thank you for calling. In our earlier show, when we were talking about perennials with our perennial guests, someone called and said, hey, can I treat some perennials as houseplants? And I wonder if, do you do any of that and what works? Which
Sure,
plants work?
I do mess around with that and enjoy it greatly. This time of year, they're all looking pretty sad, but very soon they'll be able to go outside. And the nice thing is the perennials that I am overwintering indoors are the last things in and the first things out because they are more borderline cold tolerant. So it's nice that their, rental time in my kitchen is less long. I find they do the very best on my plant porch, which is, I heat it to about 55 degrees and it has full southern sun. So I keep it really cold out there, and I do make sure to water them thoroughly once a week. My best success is with herbs. I love rosemary. I've grown one to be almost as tall as me. Mandevillas do well, citrus, hibiscus, other herbs like thyme and sage, lavender. It's definitely, a mixed bag, whether plants will tolerate it or not. But I do think if you're going to bring it inside, I would suggest having it live its life in a pot. I wouldn't put it in the ground, dig it up, bring it inside. That's too many changes. If you want to make it spend the winter indoors, you only want to make one big change in its life. You don't want to annoy it in multiple different manners at once.
Okay. Evan in Eau Claire, your turn. Hi, Evan.
Hi. I have a spider plant at home that has some brown edges on the tips. The rest of the plant is pretty green, but it's just those brown edges that I want to know maybe I could remedy that or do something about it.
Sure. Traditionally with spider plants, the brown tips, I assume, are from tap water and excessive chlorine and fluoride. I do have to say Eau Claire has fabulous water, as your name does belie, but if you think it might be possible that the tap water is causing it, I would definitely switch to purified water. Otherwise, you may be overwatering it. And in that case, I would repot it and remove any mushy brown roots and give it fresh soil and potentially a fresh pot.
Okay, so a couple different ways to look at that, Evan. Thank you very much for calling. Appreciate it. Tiffany Olson, our guest today. She's the owner of Madison Greenhouse Store on Willie Street or Williamson Street in Madison. I'm Larry Mealer for Garden Talk on WPR News. Thanks for listening in today. Larry Mealer here. Just a note, Monday we'll be talking to our physical therapy guests about resistance training for seniors, and we'll also have a look at efforts to improve health messaging in central Wisconsin. Right now, we're talking houseplants with Tiffany Olson, owner of Madison Greenhouse Store on Williamson Street in Madison. Great to have her with us. And again, you can join in at 800-642-1234 or email to talk@wpr.org. Jody in Brooklyn, Wisconsin, your turn. Hi, Jody. I think, Jody had, we're not getting her, but she has a money tree, and it's all foliage and no blooms. And she wonders, what can she do to get blooms from her money tree?
There's lots of plants that are called money trees, so I'm not sure which one she's talking about, which happens often, particularly with money tree. Money tree, Pachira aquatica, the braided tree with the trunks and the palmate foliage, those ones aren't known for blooming. I would not expect it to bloom. I've heard some people call jade plants money trees, so I'm wondering if maybe that's what she means. I have had success having jades bloom. They have lovely white blooms in the winter. And the jades that I have gotten to bloom have all been at a client's house. They have a solarium that Jordan, my friend that builds greenhouses, built for them in Maple Bluff. And these plants are huge and old and getting tons of light year round. I do fertilize lightly year round, which I know is not what everybody suggests, but it's what I do. I keep them very bonsai'd and in small pots, and then just hope for blooms in the winter.
Sounds good to me. And I like that part about fertilizing it. I told a plant expert once that she should be fertilizing her lime tree every watering. And she said, well, no, they don't recommend that. And I said, well, if you'd like limes, which I would get many from Limey, and I had her on the show the next year, and she said, I took your advice and I get all kinds of limes. So sometimes regular fertilizing can work pretty well. Lori in Manitowish Waters, your turn. Hi, Lori.
Yeah, hey, I have an older Anthermium plant. I have a couple, but this one's probably 10 years old. Actually, it was a Valentine's gift from that time. And I've repotted it up. I know they like to be pot bound. But now I'm wondering, like, the next step, because it's already in a pretty big pot. It's a big plant. It's got pretty hot lipstick pink stamens that flower all the time. How can I tell it's time to go up to another size with an anthurium that likes to be pot bound?
If the way that you are watering it seems to change greatly, like if you are testing the soil with your finger and the frequency with which you feel like you need to water changes greatly, that can be a great indication. I personally feel like at certain points with certain plants, like an anthurium, you might have just kind of reached the maximum size. If you wanted, maybe you could divide the plant and have something smaller, but I would suggest kind of if you've got it at a manageable size that fits into your lifestyle, you might want to just repot it with fresh soil, but in the same pot and not go up to a larger size. They love to be bound, root bound, so you don't want to you really don't want to go overboard, but sometimes they just like fresh nutrition, fresh soil structure. And so you can just keep it in the same pot and then maybe every spring give it some fresh soil.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Lori, give that a shot. Thank you so much for calling. Bruce in Skokie, Illinois. Your turn. Hi, Bruce.
Yeah, I like to make a U-turn and go back to ivies for a while. Boy, I just lost my train of thought. I just wanted to know, you've been in business for 12 years at your store. I never heard of it before, but because I worked up there for a dozen years. But did you ever hear of a place called Hedera, etc.?
I have not heard of that, but that's an excellent name.
I haven't either.
He used to have a catalog. He had hundreds of ivies in it, English ivy, and you could get anything. Baby gold, and I was just wondering, which ones do you carry? Any specific ones, or just what? A lot of places I'll ask what they carry, and they say whatever the wholesaler sends us. That's typically how I get answered, and I get that, but I've had arguments with people. I said, especially if you get a young thing and you say, do you have this? And they say, well, we have blue ones and we have green ones. And I said, no, every plant has a name, every single plant. And if you don't know the name, then we're not going to continue talking. I say to them.
All right, ivy.
So, as I had mentioned, I don't carry a lot of ivy because I think they're cursed with spider mites. But in the summer times, I will source ivies generally from Canada. I find plants that I get from Canada have less pest issues. They really care about how they're growing their plants in Ontario. I like to get the German ivies. I feel like they're a little bit more tolerant of different conditions with their thicker leaves. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of ivy.
Okay.
To be fully honest.
There you go, Bruce. Thank you so much for calling. Jean in Ellison Bay. Hi, Jean.
Hi, I have a Meyer lemon tree that I bought, and it's growing, but some of the branches are quite low, and I'm wondering if I should be pruning those low branches, and maybe like the lime, should I be fertilizing it more often? And I've just, my grandma used to have one in her candy store window, and I want to have lemons someday from this tree.
Well, I can tell you, I would put a fish emulsion fertilizer in every time I watered it if I were you. But that's me. What do you think, Tiffany?
I actually also agree. I think that citrus are one of the hungriest plants, and I'm all for watering them. Personally, fish emulsion is not a great smell for me in my house, so not my go-to choice for fertilizer due to smell, but I absolutely would suggest fertilizing it. If it's quite young, I would personally kind of refrain from pruning it too much other than for shape. I guess it depends on what look you're ultimately going for. But if you are going to prune it, I would wait another, month or two. Plants are, especially citrus, are really struggling at this time of year. And I have some that are making new leaves, but I wouldn't want to mess with them too much until warm temperatures are coming and they'll have happy times ahead.
I had my grow lights on in a pole lamp, so that the lamp was they were getting light from 3 different sources up and down the plant, which I kind of seemed to work well, for sure. Gene, there you go. And there are some, as you say, and you probably sell fertilizer for citrus plants other than fish emulsion.
Yeah, anything with a nice high phosphorus. But I mean, there are other things that citrus needs. So it is good to look for something that's citrus specific. Fish emulsion, though, is super great outdoors in the summer.
Well, it can work in the winter too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't eat seafood, so it's a personal thing.
Okay. One of the things that you sell is a renewable long fibered sphagnum moss. I was looking at the various products that you have a wide variety of products, and that renewable long fiber sphagnum moss is right from Wisconsin, is it not?
That is correct, yes. Mosser Lee farms sphagnum moss just north of us in central Wisconsin. We are one of the only places in the world that produces sphagnum moss. Chile and New Zealand do. And a lot of people like the New Zealand moss because it has a different texture and it's prettier. But I love that it's something that is sustainably grown so close to home. There's not all of these, boats going across the ocean with it. It's something we can be proud of here in Wisconsin.
I love it.
The downside is the crops are less reliable.
Yeah, but it's harvested here in Wisconsin marshes. It's dried. It's hand packaged. I mean, I like that idea of something from Wisconsin, a product from Wisconsin that's close to home, really close to home. You had some other one. I mean, wiggle worm castings. Benefits of that in a potted plant, indoor plant.
Worm castings are a really great additive for an indoor plant. It's just nitrogen, so it's only really going to help, the leaf part, but that's what we're doing mostly for indoor plants. It also has a lot of calcium, which all plants really enjoy. So it's really nice, and it's nice because it's very gentle. I worry sometimes when people use really, really strong fertilizers, it can be hard to measure and do it correctly. And with worm poop, you can just mix it into your soil and your plant will say thank you. You don't have to do too much thinking or too much measuring. And Wiggleworm is a local Wisconsin producer of worm castings too.
And you feature local artists, including yourself. I tell you what, I love your artwork. It is really cool. The corn cobs and the watermelon, it doesn't sound like it'd be a good combo, but it's just absolutely beautiful. Thanks for that work that you do. And I would tell people, go online to Madison Greenhouse Store if you'd like to see some of that artwork or some of the other local artists who have ceramics and planters and so forth that you sell through your store. It's a lovely store, and I want to thank you, Tiffany, so much. Will you come back and be with us again?
I would love to. I've had an absolute blast.
And somebody told me that you look a lot like the Mona Lisa, and I agreed. Thanks so much, Tiffany. Tiffany Olson, her business is Madison Greenhouse Store. It's located on Williamson Street or Willie Street in Madison. Great to have her with us. And we'll have her back, and we'll talk about houseplants again with her. It was a lot of fun. Thanks to our team. Our producers are Clara Neipert and Joel Patnaud. Our technical directors, Lee Rayburn and Jeff Robbins. Our executive producer is Jill Nadeau. I'm Larry Mealer. Thanks for listening, and stay with us. Lots more in store here on WPR News.